Hello and a very warm welcome to you. My name is Ray Lavery.
My name is Jessica Crooks.
And together we manage and run Trans Matters Worldwide and Trans London Meetup Group.
We do in-person events and online events once or twice a month. And right now we're hoping to move into webinars. We're bringing in experts and trying to educate.
That's it. And so originally this channel was actually my female to male transition line, but we have upgraded it from there. And as Jess has said, what we are going to do is we are going to do all things transgender. So there'll be fresh webinars, there'll be fresh interviews, there'll be some fun stuff if we can think about it and just record it, and things just to keep you occupied and have some fun and help you along your transgender journey. So to make sure that you don't miss out on anything, all you have to do is hit the subscribe button, and that way you will get all of the notifications of what we have coming up and you won't miss out on anything. So enjoy that, and we will see you in there. So take care and goodbye. Okay, we are live and we are recording. A very warm welcome to you. We are, as always, delighted to have you here. We are running many series of webinars, as we have since the beginning of the year, and we will continue to do that. This time, we are thrilled to be doing one on intersex and transgender. And this is a topic that is actually very close to my heart and not one that's covered very often. In fact, none of the ones that we're doing seem to be covered very often. But anyway, this one in particular. Now, if you are watching this on YouTube and you have a comment and you have a question, please put it in the comments box below. We will be monitoring those and we will get back to you. It may not be within 24 hours, but we will do our very best from there. And I guess that's kind of it. So for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Ray Lavery, and with me here I have the wonderful Jess Crooks, and together we run the Trans Matters Worldwide and the Trans London Meetup Group, and we are doing our very best to support trans people in every way that we possibly can. And thank you all for your support, your questions and your suggestions, because we are always up for those, and we will do our best to find expert speakers. Today, we are joined by the wonderful Debra Carroll-Beight. Give everybody a wave. I think they all figured out who you are by now, but just in case, a big old wave. Right, there we go. And she is a lady that I saw speak at the EPATH conference earlier this year. And she did a phenomenal job. And I literally ran up right after her presentation and stood in front of her until she talked to me. And I told her that I wanted to do this webinar, and she was just delighted and up for it. And so here we are now running that webinar. So Debra, a very warm welcome to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, no, thank you so much for inviting me. I greatly appreciate it.
Oh, no, it's no problem at all. So, Debra, maybe the best place to start here is just with a little bit of an introduction on who you are and, how all of this, I guess, kind of fits in with you.
Okay. Ray and Jess, thank you so much for inviting me here, and to everyone that's attending. I know your time is valuable, and thank you for spending it here with us. So I am a first year, I'm going to be a second year PhD student next month in bioethics at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. I also have a master's in bioethics and a master's in public health. And really, my research interests look broadly at LGBTQI plus sexual and reproductive health. And then there are certain topics that I focus on in transgender, gender expansive, and intersex persons. And as Ray mentioned, I had the opportunity to present some of my work about intersex and transgender reproduction at the EPATH conference, and was absolutely delighted when Ray ran up on me and introduced himself. So I'm very happy to be here.
Wonderful. And it's great to have you here, and it's wonderful to be covering a topic like this. So what we have is we have obviously a bunch of questions that we're going to ask, but this will be a little bit more conversational. And I think I kind of mentioned that to you as well. But why don't we start with sort of the 101 here? So basically, what is intersex?
Okay. Before I get into the details of that, there's one thing that I did want to address, and it was about terminology. Yeah. So intersex is often also called DSD, or disorders or differences of sex development. And the term DSD is predominantly used in a medical context. And the intention for that was to reduce stigma by just treating it as from a medical perspective. Now, there are some people who prefer the term DSD because they see it as just a medical condition. And then there are other people who endorse the term intersex because they choose to embrace it as an identity and really detach from the medicalisation of what they consider to be just natural variation. And then there are some with these conditions that actually reject both the intersex and DSD labels. So under the umbrella of intersex, there's just wide variation in how people choose to identify or to not identify. So you will hear me say intersex and DSD on different occasions, and I try to keep it within the context of either medical or activist work, but I do tend to use intersex more often than not. But if in the most basic definition, it is genital, gonadal, hormonal, or chromosomal variations that kind of preclude assignment into the binary categories of definitively male or definitively female. There are 4 major categories of intersex, and from those 4 categories, there are more than 40 different conditions that would be classified as intersex. These traits are innate. They can be discovered or identified at any age. There's also the ability, there's certain prenatal testing that can identify a lot of the relevant traits. That is a whole other ethical can of worms that I don't think we have time to get into today. But that's pretty much the basics of intersex. It's when you can't definitively say, or assign is maybe the better way of this is a male, this is a female.
Okay. Now, I mean, I know we're going to be talking about this a little bit later on, sort of like when infants are born and things like that. But what is interesting here is that there's a lot of people who don't even realize, because you had mentioned there about chromosomal. And that means in order to have even identified that in the first place, somebody's going to have done a test on the chromosome somewhere along the line.
Yep.
So that clearly means an enormous amount of people go unnoticed or unaware that they are themselves intersex.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If we start talking about like the number of people who are intersex, just establishing the prevalence or the frequency is a really complex process. And a lot of that is because of this wide variation in the designation of the conditions and then the onset determinations. So we will have estimates that range from 1 in 100 births up to 1 in 4,500 births. And those differences and approximations really stem from what the condition classifications are. Now, the UN Human Rights Office has provided what we would consider to be the best overall estimate, and it puts a range between 0.05% and 2% of the world population, or anywhere between 4 million and 160 million people globally that could be labeled as intersex. I personally lean more towards the 2% number, just because of the sheer fact that due to so many different competing factors, it's most likely underreported or underrecognized.
Okay.
So
as it
when
is in
it
the
comes to exactly, so when it comes to like identifying, you might be able to identify at birth. Like if you have ambiguous genitals or certain conditions, then you know from birth. Sometimes people don't find out until they start to go through puberty, or they don't go through puberty. Sometimes it's when a person decides that they want to become pregnant, and that's when it's discovered. But there's also documentation of people who never knew the entirety of their lives, and it wasn't discovered until after they died, and an autopsy was performed. So this person that had believed that they were a male their entire life have an autopsy done, and it's discovered that internally they had a uterus and ovaries that never functioned, but that they never knew was even there. So again, it just contributes to that really wide variation.
There's a lot of that. There's a lot of that sort of stuff happening. Okay, so again, I mean, at the beginning when you were introducing this, you were putting very definite terms in. Now, obviously, those terms have, come about over time. But when we talk about sort of like the history of intersection, where it actually came from, because like when you talk about transgender, which is 1% of the population, so essentially half the number that you're talking about that are intersexing, so 80 million who are transgender across the world, and you're talking about 160 million who are intersex. I mean, that's a huge number, right? So
yeah,
when you're talking about sort of the history of this, you can trace transgender history way back, like thousands of years. There's documentation on all kind of stuff. Now, what about intersex? What is the scenario there from a history perspective, or where it came from?
Okay. So I'm not going to do like some massive deep dive into history. But the first recorded use of the term intersex was from a German geneticist in 1917. But we have found representations of people with intersex traits in art, in myths, in literature, in medical texts, as far back as the 1st century BCE, up through the medieval ages, the Victorian times. And we've seen this across Europe, East and West Asia, across Africa, Central and South America. So in the same way that trans people have always existed, intersex people have always existed as well. It's just sometimes the terminology has been different.
Okay, fair enough. So a very widespread, across the ages, basically. And I guess a lot of this stuff would only really come into play once, things like autopsies were happening, once we understood that chromosomes were actually a thing. And that didn't happen in the 12th century, So
yeah.
Right. Okay. Very good. So around a long time. Okay. Now, a lot of what we hear about when it comes to sort of intersex is what you were talking about there, is like when a person is actually born, and I guess the gynecologist or the midwife or whoever takes a look at the baby and goes, "Hang on a second, that's not right."
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I know that this in itself is a huge topic. But let's just kind of, I guess, start of, I guess your viewpoints on what actually happens when somebody notices what they would call a variation.
Okay. To kind of get into that, I want to give just a little bit of recent history, just to kind of set up the context for it. So the surgical interventions on intersex people, they're rooted in heteronormative and patriarchal perspectives about sex, gender, and marriage. But up until like the mid 1960s, intersex interventions were only applied to adults who wanted to achieve their true sex. And they had to prove that they had obvious intersex traits. I would really love to point out that that was not afforded to persons who would identify as transgender. So there was a discrepancy right from the beginning there. But in about 1965, psychologist Dr. John Money from Johns Hopkins University was doing these gender theory studies on children, and he determined that gender identity was moldable only up until 18 months of age. And so to prevent a psychological incongruity and emotional instability, the practice of surgical interventions on intersex persons shifted from adults on to children. And this primary concern was not a medical emergency, but it was a social emergency, because it concluded that a child that was born with atypical looking genitals would not only be harmful to that future adult, but also to the present child's parents. So in addition to kind of reinforcing this binary view of sex and gender, this idea of shame was also introduced. So parents were advised, we're going to fix this because it doesn't look right, and we suggest you don't ever tell your child. or you lie to them about what their surgeries were. So it's not uncommon that people didn't know until they were adults, and then they got a hold of their medical records. You see this like in the mid 1990s, there were a lot of adult intersex activists who they were speaking out once they discovered that these surgeries had been performed on them without their knowledge. And they kind of confirmed that these interventions, for the most part, were medically unnecessary, and they were both physically and just psychologically harmful. Now, Dr. Money's gender theory has pretty much been debunked, and we do approach these interventions more cautiously. But these, what they consider to be normalizing surgeries, they haven't been eliminated. They still are being performed on children, obviously without their consent.
So when you say children, what sort of age are we talking about here?
It can vary. There's a lot of different factors that vary in it. It's sometimes as young as a year, and sometimes might be, it can go like 5, 6, 7 years old. And again, it depends on what the condition is or what type of surgery, what type of normalizing surgery they want to do on the child. So again, there's variation in intersex, there's variation in how they do approach the surgeries or when they approach them.
Okay, so that would be a gynecologist or a plastic surgeon who basically goes, right, we're going to do this, you're going to look like that, and this is an aesthetic thing. So what about things like sensitivity or that kind of stuff?
Well, so from the surgical standpoint, there are a few intersex conditions that actually do require some type of medical intervention, but it has nothing to do with like aesthetics. It has nothing to do with like a normalizing surgery. There's a condition called hypospadiasis. And so the urethral opening is not at the tip of the penis where it's supposed to be. It's located somewhere else, and that can actually cause like serious infections and different problems. And so that does have to be medically treated. But for the most part, they just want to be able to say, this is absolutely a boy, this is absolutely a girl. And so they will make some type of surgical change to the appearance of the genitals, or even removing particular internal reproductive organs. So this risks their fertility abilities. You will often see it impedes their sexual function. You can have scarring, chronic pain, chronic incontinence. Inaccurate gender assignment is obviously a concern, or just some other type of physical or psychological trauma that I don't think that's being addressed enough, that's being considered enough when these surgeries are decided upon.
Those last two are what we see sort of more often as someone who isn't specifically in this community. That's what you hear, these people who were assigned something that they had no choice in, had no say in whatsoever, and have found an incongruence later in life. That's what we see.
Yeah. There was I'll briefly tell you about a court case that was decided back in 2017. And it was a child that was born with ovotestis DSD, which means that they had both ovarian and testicular material. They had a penis, they had a small vaginal opening below the penis. They had both male and female reproductive organs. And it was decided that they literally could be reared as either a boy or a girl. That's the way that their physicality was made up. And they decided to make this person a girl. And not a real clear reason of why they decided it, but it was just seemed like an easier thing to do. So they removed all testicular material, they removed their penis, and they constructed a vagina for them, and they were supposed to be raised as a girl. And before the age of 7, they knew that they were a boy, but this surgery had already been performed on them. And so the parents of this child actually sued the doctors and the hospital and said, you didn't have to do the surgery, but you assigned them the wrong gender. And now they have to live with that. And there really wasn't a great decision to that case. They ended up settling out of court because it had dragged on for years and years. But what ultimately happened is that nobody admitted wrongdoing, and they didn't change their policies. So the hospital is still continuing to do these types of surgery, even though they knew it had this catastrophic result from it, that they picked the wrong thing for this individual. And now this individual has to live with that for the rest of their life.
Wow. So can I ask a question on that? Because I mean, obviously
Of
that
course.
is horrific, right? And not specifically to that case, but
Yeah.
one of the things that a transgender person has to do when they go through surgery, and they're the only people, it would seem, and maybe intersex is it might be another exception to this, where you have to go through a psychological evaluation, because apparently you're mad if you want to get any sort of permanent changes, even though 99% of the population of surgeons that are plastic surgeries that are done worldwide, which are in the region of over 100 million a year, and they don't require any psychological evaluation whatsoever, except for the 1% of transgender people, which is about 1% of the operations that actually take place. Now, when it comes to a parent being guided, does the doctor just sit down with them and go, look, this is what needs to be done, we're doing it? Or is there a pathway for that parent?
Well, I don't want to make it seem like parents and doctors are the bad guys in this scenario.
That's not what I'm
They're
asking.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is incredible societal pressure to stick to these binaries, and everybody experiences it. But what the issue is that, you know, we're taught to trust our physicians. They're the experts. They know what's best for us. They're the ones that have gone to school and have the training and everything. And so a lot of times their recommendations have an incredible amount of weight, because if you are a parent and you have it in your head that you're supposed to have either a boy or a girl, and you don't know what you have by those standards, then you're kind of at a loss. You're not really sure how to navigate this. And we don't have the best resources. We don't have the best support systems for parents in this. So if they have a physician who really believes that surgery is the best option, that they look at it as, no, we have to assign them a gender early on, that's what's going to be best for them in the long run, it's really hard to go against your physician and say, no, I want to get a second opinion, or I don't trust you. So I think part of the problem is we need more education for physicians of, hey, you don't have to automatically jump into assigning a particular gender without the input of the person you're going to be operating on. And I think we need a lot more resources and support for parents, so that when they are presented with this, they don't automatically go to having to do a surgery to do anything. So in the way that trans people are kind of forced to prove their transness and have some authority authenticate what their reality is, intersex people have that in a similar way, that they have some authority that's going to authenticate what their gender is, but they don't necessarily have a whole lot of say in how that process goes. And I think that's one of the things for intersex people we really need to look at.
Okay, I mean, it seems incredible for what would be a larger part of the population, that there's even less available there, right? So 2% rather than 1%. Now, look, believe you me, we are all advocates here for having more trans rights and more people able to make their own decisions, and we're not idiots, and we're certainly not mentally deranged in any way, shape, or form. And so, you know, having that education has come up in every single thing that we have talked about. And it would seem that this area of gender for doctors is simply not covered. It's just not covered, and that not just in the US, anywhere. It's just not part of any curriculum. I mean, last week we asked a nurse this. He was like, well, we need more education. And we were like, well, where would you put it? And she's like, well, there isn't any. It's just not covered. So, to me, this is kind of like basic 101 in med school when you're learning the anatomy, that this stuff should be put in here. Because it wouldn't be a very large chapter. It wouldn't be a very large chapter. It would just be, look, this exists. You can't decide for somebody. Nobody else knows who a person is except for that particular individual. You can't decide for them. And that, obviously, we are talking about scenarios here where a surgeon is deciding the gender of an individual. I mean, that just seems crazy to me. But that would seem like a logical choice for you to do. Now, the other point that you were talking about, where surgical intervention is required because of infections and so on, that's fine. But, changing the opening of a urethra is not the same thing as changing a gender in any shape or form. They're not even on the same page when it comes to that. So, I can get that, but at the same time, it's just like, well, I'm taking that off and I've just decided this is who you're going to be for the rest of your life. Yeah, I'm going to be challenged by that. And I have to say, my heart goes out to anybody, individuals and parents and supporters and anybody like that who has faced this, because I can't imagine what it would be like to attempt to go through this and reconcile this, particularly when you're left with this, mess of a tornado at the end of it. How horrendous. So my heart 100% goes out to them. So, moving on, I guess, a little bit from that idea, because we could start ranting now very much on this one, but
I know.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just, I guess, talk about this one. So when it comes to, intersex or gender incongruence, let's call it that, how are people being treated? What in general is happening? Is there sort of an arm and a hug around them, or just like tough, this is just the way that it is and you've got to accept it? Like, you've kind of dealt with this already, but just it seems for such a large number of people to be highly marginalized.
I think part of it is because the intersex really is kept out of our collective consciousness. Okay.
Yeah, as is transgender.
Well, you will have a lot of times people will just focus on the LGB and they keep dropping off, all the other letters. Or sometimes when you do say LGBTQI+, there's a lot of people who forget what the I is supposed to stand for. But so from a collective consciousness, we don't discuss intersex a whole lot. I think that's, as a society, we don't bring it up. So I think that it's just really not very well understood. Or it is lumped in as, oh, well, that's no different than trans people. And it is. It is there are obviously overlaps between the trans and intersex communities, but they really are kind of distinct embodiments. But they're both constrained by social gender norms and gender enforcements, and kind of have their self-determination questioned, just maybe at different times. With intersex children, it's usually when they're very, very young. Their self-determination is not given to them. And then for trans people, their self-determination is questioned. Like, are you sure? No, we need to really make sure you're sure and have you go through all these things. So I'm sorry if that went off a little bit.
No, that was super. I mean, I'm prone to ranting, so you go for it,
Well, there's a similarity there, isn't there? That sort of argument of we can't give trans kids agency, and intersex kids are having the same issue, really, in a different sense.
It is one of the things that is really infuriating, specifically to me in the US right now, with all of these bills that are aimed against trans youth. Because the anti-trans people who are constructing these bills and who are railing against it, they're saying, well, we don't want you to sterilize our children, because they have this belief, or they're perpetuating this narrative, that if you're a trans youth, regardless of age, we're just automatically throwing you down onto an operating table and cutting you up. And no, a 5-year-old getting gender affirming care is just their pronouns, their name, the way they dress. We're not talking about doing surgical interventions on a 10-year-old trans child. But they seem to look the other way when you bring up intersex. intersex children are being sterilized. And these bills that they're writing, they're actually putting in loopholes to continue doing these operations on intersex children. So they're saying trans children, no, 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 we can't give them gender affirming care, but intersex children, oh yeah, we have to decide what your gender is, and then we need to make your physical body match what we have decided it to be. So in that sense, intersex exists in the body, it's physical, but they think trans is just in the psyche. And if you're intersex, well, that wasn't your fault, and we need to fix you. But if you're trans, no, 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 there's something wrong with you, and you need to figure that out and fix yourself. And like they're just not seeing, the people who are constructing these bills really aren't seeing this kind of incongruence between those two ideas.
But they're also just deciding that they're right and that's it.
Well,
There's
yeah,
no question.
That's a big
I'm right,
part.
you're wrong. End of conversation. That is that
Yeah.
level of arrogance and righteousness is
Exactly.
incredible. Talk about delusional.
Yeah,
That is where the delusion really sits, is with people who think like that, you know, a real lack of understanding of the diversity of the world, you know, and I say this all the time. There's no such thing as normal. No such thing. You are one person in 8 billion people.
exactly.
Every one of those 8 billion people has a different way of doing things, is completely unique, has completely new ways of looking at life, has completely different experiences. Every single person on the planet, including those righteous ones, are a minority of one.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
No,
it
but
doesn't
when
get
you
any more than that.
no, but when you construct this narrative and you reinforce this narrative, then more people believe, oh, that's quote unquote normal, that's the way that it's supposed to be. And it's like, no, 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 we need more people pushing back on that and questioning it and saying, no, like normal is what somebody just decides and labels as normal. It's not an actual tangible thing.
Yeah, exactly. More of that. We're doing our best, believe you me. So super. Okay. So look, basically they are treated as really what you're saying is their treatment is they don't have a voice at all. At least transgender people have some level of a voice.
Again, it depends on the age. There are a few parents who resist that push to assign a gender early on. And they wait until their child grows up a little bit more and can maybe have a better understanding of this is what your body is doing. Usually you'll hear about this of like children before they start to go through puberty. So they'll kind of explain your body is different. It doesn't look like the other kids. We can do this to make you look, you know, like everybody else. How do you feel about that? And so like children can't consent to these procedures, but they can give their assent. They can get their input. But you also have to kind of look at it as if you're asking a child, hey, I'm mom and dad, and I'm presenting this to you. And hey, I think we should probably get this operation, or we think this would be what's best for you. If you're 11, 12, 13 years old, I think it would be really difficult to tell your parents, no, that's okay. Let's just leave me as is and I'll decide later. You know, and again, it just depends on the severity of the trait or the condition. You know, there's no easy answer for it, but I think that kind of this blanket idea of just fixing it as quickly as possible is not the solution. That actually can do a lot more harm than good.
Yeah, and it seems to be the case. It seems
Yeah.
to be the case, you know. Okay, so what about then? We've been talking a lot about this kind of thing, and we've got you know what I mean, how to say vocal on what it's like. What about if you're a person who's questioning? Maybe you don't, or you do have, you know, genitals that are maybe not the same as everybody else's, which they aren't, by the way. There's no such thing as that.
Yeah,
either.
yeah.
You know, apparently 1 in 20 births, it don't look, something looks a little bit off, or is too big or too small or whatever. You know, so that's
Yeah.
a huge number of people if you go down that category. But how would you know, or is there a way to know that you are intersex? I mean, obviously chromosomal, you'll just have to do a test, but from another point of view.
Well, I mean, I kind of had touched on it, that it's innate and that you could discover it at any time. So if we're talking about like from birth, it would typically be something visual, that you have noticeably atypical genitals. Now, under the umbrella of intersex, an enlarged clitoris, a micro penis, those classify as intersex traits. Okay. Now we can argue that's not necessarily intersex. That again, it could just be human variation, but those would be considered atypical genitals. If you have a fused labia, bifurcated scrotum, if you have both a phallus and a vaginal opening, you know, those are visual representations of intersex conditions. So if you don't have these, then the next step would be at the time when you would normally go into puberty. So either there is no onset of puberty and then you have to go see a physician to see what's going on. So like you're assigned female at birth, but you don't ever menstruate. Or if the changes to your body during puberty don't align with your assigned sex. So if you were a person who was assigned male at birth and you start growing breasts, that could be another point where then you would go to a doctor and they could do some type of testing. And then the next point would be, like I mentioned, like you try to get pregnant and they are trying to figure out, well, why you can't. So you could have a chromosome analysis, you can have your hormone levels checked. They can do hormone stimulation tests. They can do an ultrasound or an MRI to look at your internal organs to see, you know, oh, I'm assigned male at birth, but it turns out that I have a uterus or I have ovaries. So it's, and then, like I said, it's possible that you never get confirmation at any point in your lifetime. It really just depends if you have access to get this testing done. If you have a physician who is, you know, willing to run this test for you to find out if you are definitively intersex or not.
Okay. All right. So there's a lot of different ways. Now you mentioned something there, which kind of almost triggered me a little bit on a different conversation, the ePath, but you mentioned there something about stimulation as a way of testing. Now, what exactly are you talking about? Are you talking about that horrendous machine?
No, this is supposed to be a method where you give like a heavy dose of one hormone to see how the body reacts to it. And if the body reacts in a particular, it's done through blood tests, but if it reacts in a particular range, then no, that's a normal reaction. But if it reacts in a different type of range, then that could indicate that you have an intersex condition or intersex traits. And then from that point, they would then go on and do additional testing like the chromosomal testing. So like the hormone levels are kind of like the first line of testing that you could do, and then they go incrementally up from there.
Okay, so hang on. I just want to understand that.
Yeah.
If you add a hormone to a person, their body will react to that. We are case in point for that.
Yes.
So
yeah,
how do you define? Because, you know, I mean, when you look at it, like when, you know, you are conceived, if you like, and you become a bunch of eggs and then, you know, become a blastocyst and whatever, the first 7 weeks of your life, you are everybody without exception. The only rule that I can see that is not broken is you are a female. For about the first 7 weeks of your life, everybody on this planet is a female. And then based on either that chromosome twist or what hormone gets given to you, those exact same cells will either develop male or they will develop female or intersex or something in between. So this is, you know, those same cells can be either. They can be either. It's almost like a twist of fate on this here. And I know that nobody is quite sure yet what exactly is triggered to make this either male or female, you know, and it's not the sex chromosomes, because you can develop fully as a male and have, you know, XX and XY and XXY and XYYY. And there's like all kinds of, so the sex chromosome, which is often used as the you are intersexed or you are transgender, is in no way a rule. It's so out there that it can't even be used scientifically whatsoever, except that these chromosomes exist. So I guess my point is that, you know, this test of the hormones, of course the body will react. It's designed to do that.
It's arbitrary. It's an arbitrary designation. We had talked about this briefly. There was this Olympic athlete
Yeah,
from South Africa.
yeah,
Her name is Caster Semenya,
yeah.
and they were accused of having too much testosterone in their body. So in, I think it was 2009, they were required to undergo medical testing. And the suspicion was that this person was intersex. Okay.
Not
And
doping now, intersex.
yeah, this is what they were saying about this person. Now, this person at the time was basically like, you know, I'm female. I'm, you know, you don't get to tell me what I am. They identified as female. They were born female. They are assigned female at birth. They had, you know, female organs. They were raised female. And so they had to go through this testing, and they were told that their testosterone level, the only way they could continue competing is they had to suppress their testosterone level to be under 5 nanomoles per liter. I have no idea what that is. I'm just going to be upfront with that.
Yeah.
So looking into this, to be classified as female, your nanomoles for testosterone are supposed to be between 0.5 and 2.4 nanomoles per liter. And males are 10 to 35 nanomoles per liter. And Caster fell in between those two. But they decided, no, that's too masculine. So for you to be able to compete in sports with women, you have to get your level down below this particular marker. And it was just arbitrary. It was just a number that they decided, this is where we're going to say you qualify as a female to be allowed to participate.
Right.
And
Was she the only one
yeah.
asked to test?
No, there have been other athletes that have been asked to be tested or required for this.
No, I mean, were all the other athletes in her race asked to test?
No,
Of course not.
absolutely not.
Of course not.
No, and they also ignore the fact that there are so many different things that can make a person, I'll say a female, you know, traditional female, that their testosterone levels might be higher, just naturally higher. And it has nothing to do with them being intersex or anything like that. Again, it's just human variation. But they've decided this is the line in the sand where we're going to make this determination. And, you know, it's just frustrating. And it's how you have to prove, you have to authenticate who you are. And it's not enough for me to tell you, it's not enough for me to look like it. Now you're going to tell me that my hormone levels have to confirm what I am. That's just infuriating.
Yeah, well, our hormone levels have to confirm all kinds of things. Particularly, we're not going to get into the debate about sport because we'll cover that on a different one. But there's all kinds of stuff about the ridiculousness and also the studies that have actually been done to literally just debunk everything that is being used in science when it comes to hormone levels. So, you know, when we're talking about, I mean, you've given the hormone levels now, and in fairness, when it comes to transgender, we tend to know the hormone levels and where it needs to be because we're tested on it pretty much on an ongoing basis on this. And certainly, even if you're microdosing, so for instance, if you would say that you're non-binary and you're microdosing, you are still going to be over the T levels or the E levels, and you will get changes, though they will take longer. And, you know, your body will do whatever it's told based on the hormone that is most prevalent, that is strongest in your body. And both estrogen and testosterone are very strong, and they will battle with each other. But the one that, you know, one wins. And that's it. And your body will change regardless of there's hundreds and thousands, millions of us who have proven that that it just that's the way that it kind of is. So it's kind of weird to see that levied against people because you can pick anybody out. Just do a random test. You're guaranteed if you just test 1,000 people that there's going to be a lot of variation. These are cis people who don't see themselves any differently. They're like, oh, really? And then they're like, well, am I intersex? I don't know.
Yeah.
Are you? So it's incredible with such obvious incongruence, as you put in there, that there's such hard and fast lines being drawn here. When the real thing is here, we don't know. We don't know
Mhm.
because we have never tested enough variation to actually know. You know, and I find that fascinating that the lack of scientific evidence basically means whoever shouts loudest is the one who is scientifically correct. You know,
Oh, it's sad but accurate. Yeah.
I know. I mean, my favorite one, and I know I told you when we talked, previously about, it was a fact, a scientific proven fact that if a woman was raped, that unless she enjoyed herself, she could not get pregnant. And that was
Yep.
scientific fact up until what about
Mhm.
I think it was still used up until the 1950s, but I think 1850 had been totally debunked. But from the 11th century onwards, that was just standard.
Yep.
Standard. So if you got raped and you enjoyed it, if you got raped and you got pregnant, that meant you enjoyed it, which meant it wasn't rape anymore.
Yep. Yep.
Oh my God. So,
Just unreal.
who comes up with this stuff? Certainly not scientists. Anyway, okay. So look, when we're talking about all of this kind of stuff now, is there something that you can do if you think that you're like not transgender? We all know that one, but if you think that you're intersexed, what is the best course of action for you to take? If this is something that's either been on your mind or you're like, oh, I'm not so sure, and even if you've heard this and now you're definitely not so sure, like what should you do?
Well, I mean, I do want to preface this with, I don't want anybody to feel like they have to do something. Okay,
Right.
you can
Very true.
exist unambiguous or ambiguously if you would choose. That's perfectly your choice. But if you did want to get some type of confirmation, if you suspected it, honestly, the only way that you could do it is you would have to talk to a physician and make an arrangement to get some type of genetic testing done. They probably would want to start with the hormone testing, most likely, but really if you would get genetic testing done, that would give you a definitive answer.
Right. Okay. So that would be the starting point. And then if it is obviously something that you want to talk about, get help, get support. Now
Oh
I
yeah,
was looking around.
absolutely.
Yeah, there are tons of intersex support groups out there on Facebook and stuff like that. Now, funny enough, the numbers are not very big for the volume of people that are actually intersex, because if you look at a trans group, there's thousands and thousands of people in it. But if you look at an
Yep.
intersex, there's like less than 1,000 in most of these groups. I found that very surprising. Is it just
Well,
like
I
it's
think
really
some
hidden or
of it,
something?
no, I think some of that actually goes to that issue with um, if your child was born with an intersex trait and you have decided you're going to have an operation on that child and never tell them about it, and they never
Right.
find out, that actually is unfortunately kind of common. And I mean, parents are doing it with the best intentions.
Of
They
course.
think
Of
they're
course.
making the right choice for them, but
Yes.
there's a lot of times where people, they don't find out until, even sometimes until much later in life. And when I had mentioned earlier about when they made that shift from adults to children, that introduced that notion of shame, as though being intersex is something that you should be ashamed of, that, oh no, there's something wrong with me, I need to be fixed. And then that makes it very difficult to try and talk about and connect with other people because you feel like there's something wrong with you.
Right. Okay. And really, there isn't. I mean, look, in reality, we talk about body dysmorphia, different to gender dysphoria, but body dysmorphia, where people don't like something about themselves, about their body, about that
Mhm.
kind of thing. And the only thing I can think of is I don't know anybody who doesn't have it. I mean, okay, there's extreme circumstances for sure
Mhm.
where it becomes an eating disorder and all of this kind of stuff. Okay, I'm not talking about that, but I don't know anybody who stands up in front of any mirror and go, I look fabulous in every way. You're always going to go, my nose is too big, I'm too tall, I'm too fat, I'm too skinny, my skin is the wrong color, my nails are just weird, my feet
Mhm.
turn in. Like everybody's got something. I don't know anybody who thinks, oh, I'm amazing. Okay, there's a few in the gym bunnies and stuff like that who do type of thing. Okay, fair
Yeah.
enough. But though usually those guys are doing it because they have so much to hide. They are so not in peace with themselves. Not saying that to all of you who are out there doing weightlifting. Okay, there's good reasons for it, but I have seen this an awful lot where people are
Yeah.
masking They're doing stuff to mask how they really feel. And that is not helpful either, really,
Yeah.
So it's everywhere. It's everywhere. But get support, because there's definitely support out there. And if you can't find anybody else, you found us, we'll help you. That's for sure. We'll help you. So look, we've been going on here. I just want to touch on one more thing, if I may. There is a lot of because there's a lot of crossover between intersex and transgender, and and you've already explained very well. Thank you for that. What the differences are, basically. There's huge differences in there, but it's with the path that we are on, and as we've already discussed, we have to prove ourselves an awful lot. And occasionally, I will say occasionally, we come up against people who are helping us, who maybe have just of that opinion that being transgender is nothing more than a mental disorder, and they use you're using intersex as a reason, or as a, as proof that it's not real.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that kind of insinuation, not quite insinuation, downright, this is the way that it is, you're wrong, etc. How is there, I mean, I know I'm asking you, and this is not quite your field, but what can a person do to answer that? I mean, I would say, first of all, someone saying that to you, stop letting them be your psychologist, because they're way wrong. They're way out of line. You should not ever let somebody treat you like that. But if you still, let's say you're a child and you are being forced to go through a particular process, but you don't have the ability to choose who your therapist is, what can you actually do about this?
That is a really difficult question, just because, like, specifically with children, you are at the whim of every other adult. Like there's very little that you have control over, and that you're able to direct in your life course. There are organizations for intersex that they do have like a youth outreach, and then like their websites and different things, and hopefully someone could find like something on Facebook. But if you're a child, you really, really are constrained by what the system allows you access to, what your parents allow you access to, your parents or guardians. So I think for kids, it's just unbelievably limiting for them. For an adult, I hope that they have enough support, and they have enough wherewithal to be able to say, no, you're not going to speak to me that way. I'm not listening to you. I'm going to find somebody who's actually going to help me. But kids are really just in such a hard place, that they kind of suffer at the mercy of these systems.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, look, you may not be able to say no or stand up for yourself, but be aware, I guess, is the thing. Be aware that if somebody takes this tract with you, they are not well educated on this subject, and and it is really time for you to do anything that you can to get away from there, because they are not helping you. So reach out to either an intersex group or to a transgender group, because believe you me, we're very good at coming up with ways of getting out of bad therapy. And there's plenty of that going around. So we've talked about a lot of different things here, and I have to say, funnily enough, we've asked a lot of questions, and there's a lot that's come out of here. And you know what? I'm going to be thinking about this later on, going, oh, I wished I'd asked this question. But I think we've kind of got the majority of what we wanted to do out of the way, because we could talk about this stuff for hours and hours and hours. So, yeah, we could. Yeah, we could, absolutely. And I have to say that we've mentioned this point a few times. You certainly have, but I would like to mirror that again, that if you are a parent of a trans child, or you are a parent of an intersex child, you don't have to carry the burden on your shoulders alone. Okay, you don't have to make the decisions. What is very important for you is that you understand that your child, as you are, is a complete individual. And though you are doing your best to protect them, the best way to protect the child is to allow them to be who they are, whoever that is, whether that is what you would prefer or not. Okay, the same way you would not want somebody else to tell you who you are and give you massive rules. Please don't do it to your child. And if you are suffering and don't understand this, because I get that too, please reach out to an organization. There's no shortage of organizations in either the intersex or the transgender where you can't at least have someone, listen to you, so that you can at least have a rant and get that out of your system, and then help yourself being educated, because this is going to be a shock for any parent. Okay, this is not like, wait, I can't wait. This is not part
Yeah.
of the, what is the gender ceremony that happens in the States that they do? Did they do that
Oh,
here,
those
Jordan? They do.
awful gender reveal parties. Like,
Oh
please
God, yeah,
stop
those things.
doing that.
Stop doing that. Yeah. So exactly. So look, there is help out there. We here are. This is about information. This is about giving people information so that they can make their own logical, well-educated mind up. It's no, we're not trying to force any opinions down anybody's throats. I want to be aware of that. I don't want anybody to feel that we're, making anybody the bad guy. We're not. We just want to get the information out there. But look, I have to say, there is one actual question that has come in here. Okay. Have you got any information on 5ARD sex? I think that's what that is. I'm not quite sure. They just typed 5ARD intersex. Is that something you're familiar with?
Not, I mean, I've heard of it, but I don't know enough about that particular condition. So I apologize off the top of my head. No, I don't have a lot of information about it.
Okay.
What I am more than happy to do is to try and find out some stuff, and then I can share it with you, Ray. And then if you want to make it available on your website or on the YouTube when this gets posted, I am absolutely more than happy to do that.
Yeah, fine. And I'll be honest with you, I've never heard of it before. So I would be very interested in finding out as well. So that would be fantastic.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Deborah, thank you so much. You have been phenomenal. Thank you for letting me barrage you with questions and being so good. I love these conversations, and I love to learn more. And it's absolutely fantastic to hear, what you are doing, what you are studying, and also how you are helping people who are intersex. So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for joining us
Oh,
today.
it was my pleasure, and believe me, I could talk about this all day. I really can. So thank
Well, look,
you.
if it's okay with you, we'll put your contact details in the description of the video, so you might get some
Yes,
emails of people if that's
I
okay.
welcome it. Yeah, definitely, I
Fantastic.
welcome that.
Okay, wonderful stuff. Great. So look, just in case you sort of dropped it in the middle of this, if you have any questions or any comments, now it's going to be on a YouTube channel. Please put them on the comments below. We will get back to you. Thank you for being here with us today. Thank you for listening to us. We do hope that you enjoyed it and found it informative. And please enjoy your day, your evening, your night, whenever it is that you're actually watching this. And we look forward to seeing you on the next one. So until then, everybody, take care and goodbye. Take it easy.
Thanks.
Bye,
Goodbye,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Mhm.
Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe just so you won't miss out on anything we do. Thanks so much.
Bye.